Well, good afternoon, everybody. As he said, I'm Carole Wendler. I'm the acting superintendent for the National Park Service office. I'm based in Santa Fe, New Mexico. I've had about 2 hours of sleep, and because my flights got canceled and mixed up, and if anybody else tried to travel here, you probably had a similar experience. So I'm a little scratchy for lack of sleep, I think. But I'm happy to be here today and share a little bit about what we do with the Mormon Pioneer National Historic Trail. And in particular, I'm going to share this study that was done about finding historic buildings and structures associated with the trail from Nauvoo to North Platte. So, like I said, I'm with the National Park Service, and some of you may be wondering, what's the connection there? And so the connection is that this trail is one of, and I'll show you a map in just a second, one of 19 National Historic Trails, and our office administers the Mormon Pioneer National Historic Trail as well as 8 others. And to do that, we provide limited technical assistance and financial assistance to sites along the trails that are wishing to protect, develop, and promote their sites for the public. So it was very interesting for me to show up today and see this line of what we would call interpretive waysides on the easels in the back of the room here. I would guess those are 20-some years old. Very curious to know where they came from. But that is the kind of thing, we would have done those back in the day. We actually just did a similar project in Iowa. We did about 10 interpretive waysides for Mormon Pioneer sites across Iowa, and they're just being installed right now. They look a little different these days. The design, they're brighter in color. Doesn't cost so much to print color as it did back when these were produced. That's why there's only basically 2 colors on those panels. Yeah, it's kind of fun to see all that. But we provide technical assistance in the realms of trail protection, preservation, interpretation, information, and site development and signing. So as I mentioned, the trail is part of what's called the National Trail System. The National Trail System Act was passed by Congress in 1968. So it's just a little more than 50 years old now. There are now 11 national scenic trails in the system. Most of you have probably heard of some of those, the Appalachian Trail, Pacific Crest Trail. Most folks, even if you're not hikers, have at least heard of those 2 trails. The National Historic Trails are a little more unique. Not a lot of folks are as familiar with them, but there are now 19. And as I said, the Mormon Pioneer National Historic Trail is one of those 19. So it's pretty good recognition, right? To be one of 19 national trails. So this particular trail crosses 5 states, from Nauvoo to the Great Salt Lake Valley. Congress, when it passes the legislation for a National Historic Trail, establishes what's called a period of significance. And so for us in the National Historic Trail, the period of significance is just that 1 year, 1846 to 1847. So we certainly realize that lots more people were traveling the trail outside of those years and after 1847, but that's the particular period that we really focus our work on. And the trail is about 1,381 miles long. So the study that I want to share with you today was done through an agreement with the Middle Tennessee State University in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. The Center for Historic Preservation, and leading this study was a woman named Amy Costin. I actually invited Amy to come and join me today in this presentation. Since I know many of you are historians, are probably more informed than I might be, actually. My role is really sort of operations and management and agreements and budgets and all that fun stuff. And so I was hoping Amy could join me in case any of you had really detailed questions, so don't ask me any of those. I do, in fact, have the study on my iPad, and if somebody at some point can help me figure out how to get it on Wi-Fi, I can pull that up. So if someone would like to see the study sometime, I'm happy to do that. If I turn my head, do you lose the mic? Almost sounds that way to me.
It picks up pretty well.
I'm doing all right? All right. Okay. So what was this study about? So the guidelines for the study, again, was that they were looking for structures that met that period of significance, 1846 and 1847, Generally, all pre-1847 buildings within about a quarter of a mile of the designated trail were included in the survey. Building and structures with direct connections were included, as well as what are called witness buildings, meaning they were there, but we lack identified direct connection to the trail. And then lastly, outbuildings located on a property are identified in a sort of a different section, so additional features. So how did they do this study? They did archival research, they did inquiries and outreach with a lot of different people, and they did a lot of field work. So whenever possible, they tried to drive on or as close to the trail in order to identify the buildings. So I've just selected kind of a smattering of buildings that I thought were kind of interesting for one reason or another to share with you here today. So the first one here is one you're probably all pretty familiar with. So the Carthage jail, and so this is where Joseph Smith and his brother were shot and killed, and the building remained a jail for the next 20 years after that. In 1903, the church purchased the jail, and in 1938, the church restored the jail to the original layout of only 6 rooms. This is what it would look like if you were inside that jail. So, and I'm pretty sure that's a little wood stove. So it looks like a little wood stove to me, which I think would be pretty needed. I think those stone walls would have been awfully cold. So Joseph Smith and others probably really didn't spend much time in this particular cell, but apparently John Taylor was hid in this room. So then we have the Joseph Smith homestead. So obviously the original homes and buildings still standing in Nauvoo hold great importance to the integrity of the historic town. This home is now owned by the Community of Christ. And how do I scroll my notes down here? Okay, so it's owned by the Community of Christ, who restored and rebuilt portions of the home to fit the original look during the time Joseph and Emma Smith lived on the homestead. And certainly it's arguably one of the most significant original buildings still standing. Then we also have the Wilford Woodruff home. This was the home of Wilford and Phoebe Woodruff. And I have to be frank that the reason I picked this was because of that number there under that second bullet. That the guy counted the number of bricks he used, right? 14,574 bricks. I wanted, was it really 14,575? Any mistakes there? So construction on the 2-story, 5-bay brick home with double interior and chimneys began in 1843, but was still not complete by May 1846 when they sold the house to Head West. This is due in part to the fact that Woodruff did much of the construction work himself, and he did it while he was in between international missions for the church. Because of his time away, he only lived in the house for approximately 64 days. However, the house was lived in continuously from 1844 until 1965, when a 4-year restoration project began. And I thought it was also kind of interesting that what the Amy Costin and her group found really amazing about this home was just the wear and tear on the floor, just showing how much traffic had passed through that house. So today it's finely furnished with an array of furniture, portraits, and functional and decorative domestic accessories that reflect the family's status in the church community. Moving on, and I'm actually not sure how you pronounce the name of this little community, but I'm gonna go for Bonaparte. Hopefully I'm close. And while there are a number of buildings in Bonaparte that date to the 1850s, there are 2, possibly 3 buildings that existed at the time when the Mormon pioneers traveled through the town. One is this Auntie Green Hotel. And it is considered the first brick building erected in the town and represents the first wave of Bonaparte's development into a gateway for the Iowa Territory and beyond. The building is constructed with locally made brick. John Green worked as a blacksmith during their first years in Bonaparte, but the 1.5-story brick building attached to the north elevation was added at an unknown date and is also made of local brick. And then here's why I picked it. The hotel was a stagecoach stop for overland travelers and served those traveling and working on the steamboats plying the Des Moines River. John Green passed away in 1859, and according to the National Register of Historic Places, Mary took over the business after John's death. And then we have this home, the Thomas Christie home. Thomas and his wife Sarah Caroline and children moved to the house in Bonaparte sometime between 1860 and 1870. The overall form of the home has not really changed substantially, although looking at the photo you can probably figure out which part is the modern addition. There on the back, in the left, the garage, the vinyl garage. Okay. So that was constructed within Bonaparte's original town plat. And then moving on to Bentonsport, Iowa. This is the Mason House Inn. And this was built to serve steamboat travelers on the Des Moines River during the Civil War. It was reportedly used as a holding hospital for wounded soldiers, a station on Underground Railroad, and was briefly used as a tuberculosis sanitarium in the early 1900s. The building stayed in the Mason family for 99 years. So built in 1846 and constructed of brick. Then we have the Hancock House here. So there are 3 frame buildings in Bentonsport that were reportedly constructed on or before 1847. Alexander's Cottage, the Hotley House, and the Hancock House, which is this one here. While there's no documentary evidence to suggest Mormon craftsmen worked on any of these 3 buildings, however, they certainly were there, reportedly constructed on or before 1847. And this one, you can see why I picked this one. You're probably starting to figure out that I've liked the kind of funky little sites here. And so this one was the really ornate, constructed with 39 different species of wood, 12 varieties just in the staircase. If I'd had a picture of that, I would have shared that with you. I did. Okay, so then we have the Van Buren County Courthouse. And although Brigham Young's Camp of Israel passed south of, is it Keosauqua? Am I close? Okay. Passed south of Keosauqua on March 5th, the residents of the town requested that Pitt's Nauvoo Band perform at the Van Buren Courthouse. Despite being encamped at Richardson's Point, 10 miles away, the band obliged and performed on March 10th, 11th, and 17th at the courthouse in exchange for supplies and cash to help support their fellow immigrants. The same Van Buren Courthouse that Pitt's Nauvoo Band played in during their journey west still stands today. Built in 1843, the building underwent an interior restoration from 1981 to 83 and exterior restoration in 1997. Then a different type of building. Here we have a barn. The Borntrager barn. So approximately 6 miles before the Mormon pioneers left present-day Van Buren County, they passed through the community of Lebanon and by this barn. The barn was constructed on property homesteaded by Giles Tenek. If I'm pronouncing his name correctly. Giles was born in Albany, New York, traveled west by canal boat, and trained to St. Louis in 1845. And then from St. Louis, he reportedly walked to Lebanon, Iowa. And here's what that barn looks like inside. The barn measures 26 by 38 feet. According to census records, Tenek was a farmer, but he was also reportedly a furniture maker by trade and built the barn himself using white oak timbers he hand-hewed and pinned together. So you can see some of those pins in those beams there. And then there's this. And I love the comment in the report that this is in need of immediate intervention. It's listed on the National Register of Historic Places. Towns and villages dwindled as the Mormon pioneers traveled further west out of Van Buren County, Iowa. Only 3 additional resources in Iowa were identified for this survey west of Lebanon. Approximately 1 mile west of the Van Buren-Davis County line, Mormon pioneers passed this Stringtown Stagecoach House. That's a hard one to say, Stringtown Stagecoach House. It was built in 1832 by Byron Wilson on land purchased from the U.S. government. And it's likely that other Mormons passed by and dined at this building before returning to Richard's Point, where the Camp of Israel was encamped. This was by far the structure in the worst state of repair. Everything else looked like it was in pretty good shape. And then here we have the only urban building that was found on this survey, so it kind of tells you how much the landscape and communities have changed, right? It's here at the former location of winter quarters in present-day Florence, where the only building associated with the Mormon Pioneer Trail remains from the Iowa-Nebraska state line to North Platte. Construction of a mill at winter quarters began in October 1846 under the direction of millwright Frederick Kessler Jr. and was financed by the church. The mill was abandoned in 1848. It's listed on the National Register of Historic Places. The mill has undergone extensive transformation over the years, including updates in 1880 when a grain elevator was added, and then around 1939 the entire building was moved due to consistent repeated flooding. So it was operated by March of 1847, employing about 150 men, and was one of the first mills in Nebraska. So that's just some highlights of this study here, but to give you an idea of what they found, 64 historic buildings and 3 structures were identified for their known or potential connections to the trail. Only 1 building, the one we just looked at, located in an urban area, 63 in small towns and communities, and 3 are in predominantly rural or forested areas. 52 of the buildings and structures identified have a direct association to the Mormon Pioneer Trail, trail. And nearly all of these buildings and structures remain in good condition, which is pretty amazing. So while the landscape of the Mormon Pioneer Trail today has been altered by time, it still really remains rich in material culture. So this study, we just received this study. It was just completed this spring. We do not have it up on our website yet, but that is our intention. I do have it on my iPad if somebody would really like to take a look at it today, if I can just get on the Wi-Fi. But if you want, there's the website address for the Mormon Pioneer National Historic Trail, that mps.gov/MOPI. And you can watch for it. It will be posted up there once we do a little bit more work to it. Well, I want to thank you for the opportunity to share this little bit of research and story that we did today. Thanks for your time.